A quiet Kentucky road holds a kind of silence that feels older than the trees that line it, a silence that remembers more than it will ever repeat. On summer nights, its swallows sound away a secret swallow's breath, slowly, patiently, as if waiting for someone to ask the right question. That was the kind of night it was in 2002, when a couple who had driven that road for years slipped into the dark and simply never made it back. No screeching tires, no frantic calls, no frantic chase. Just an ordinary drive that dissolved into something the town would speak about in lowered voices for decades. People still say the air felt strange that summer, like the humidity carried a warning that no one knew how to hear. The couple had left home with nothing unusual in their movements, nothing to mark that their final moments in the world would seem so painfully uneventful. They were the sort of pair who moved through life gently. Two people who fit into the rhythm of their small community, the way dusk fits into day. Familiar, predictable, safe, and that was what made their disappearance feel so unnatural, as if the universe had removed them with a trembling hand rather than a violent one. Neighbors would later describe the couple in ways that feel like a soft photograph. Warm, steady, unremarkably good. When people talked about them, their voices softened without realizing it. They weren't the type to run away, weren't the type to keep dangerous company, weren't the type to leave so much as a single worry in their wake. But when the sun rose the morning after they vanished, it lit up a truth no one wanted to face. Sometimes the people we believe we understand are carrying storms we never see forming. In those early hours, no one felt the shift yet. Friends thought the couple had gone to bed early. Family assumed they were resting. Their quietness blended seamlessly into the background of a small-town night. But by the end of that week, when unanswered calls piled up and a front porch light stayed on even in broad daylight, something in the air changed. Concern became a tremor. That tremor became a wound. There's a strange ache that settles over community when good people disappear. It's a grief without an object, a fear without a shape. Every home becomes a little less certain. Every familiar place gains a shadow where one never existed before. In Kentucky, that shadow grew quickly. Conversations that once carried the usual warmth of local gossip shifted into careful, hesitant whispers, restless glances over shoulders, the kind of worry that sinks into a person's bones and refuses to leave. Days turned into weeks, and the void where the couple should have been became heavier. Search parties swept through forests, traced creek beds, wandered down old farm roads, calling their names into spaces that absorbed the sound without answering back. The quiet that once felt peaceful now felt sharp enough to cut. People began to feel watched by their own imaginations, haunted not by what they knew, but by what they didn't. No one realized then that the truth, fragile, intimate, and unsettling, was lying in wait only a few miles away, sealed inside a house drawer that had gone unnoticed for years, hidden behind a built-in shelf, tucked in the dark like a memory someone didn't want to revisit. That drawer would one day open a path back into the couple's private world. And when it did, nothing about their disappearance would look the same. But in 2002, no one had that drawer. They had only fear and guesswork, rumors shaped by longing and confusion. Some believed the couple had been taken by someone passing through town. Others whispered about a secret disagreement, a sharp word exchanged behind closed doors. Most, however, clung to the belief that the couple would return as quietly as they had left, that the door would swing open, their faces would appear tired but safe, and life would slip back into place without ever explaining the missing hours. That hope clung to people like humidity clings to skin. It made every phone ring feel urgent, every knock at the door feel like a heartbeat skipping. But hope, when stretched too thin, has a way of turning into something fragile, something that hurts to hold. The disappearance didn't just reshape the couple's home or their family. It reshaped the people who searched, the people who waited, the people who prayed. It reshaped the land itself, turning quiet roads into reminders and turning ordinary moments into questions that refuse to settle. The mystery embedded itself in the fabric of everyday life, soft but persistent, like a splinter you can't quite remove. And even as the years passed and the ache dulled into a tolerable hum, the town carried the disappearance the way one carries a bruise. Tenderly, carefully, always aware of it even when pretending not to be. No one suspected that the answers weren't buried in the woods or at the bottom of a ravine, but hidden in a place so close so painfully domestic that the truth would feel less like a revelation and more like a confession. But that moment was still years away. In the beginning, all the town had was a couple swallowed by darkness, a night that refused to explain itself, and a silence thick enough to feel like a presence. A silence waiting for the day a drawer would open and change everything. Their lives unfolded in a way that felt beautifully ordinary, the kind of simplicity that small Kentucky towns quietly treasure. Before the disappearance, before the unanswered calls and late-night fears, the couple lived in a rhythm so familiar that most people never questioned it. They were the pair everyone waved to when passing the post office, the couple who sat on their front porch on warm evenings, sharing iced tea and quiet laughter that could be heard through the honeysuckle-scented air. Nothing about them ever suggested a storm building beneath the surface. Their home reflected the kind of life they built, modest, lived in, touched by the softness of people who found comfort in one another. A hand-stitched quilt lay draped over their couch, the kind of thing that takes months to finish and years to appreciate. Family pictures lined the hallway, not posed or polished, but captured in the moments between moments. Him brushing dirt off his jeans after a long day at work, her leaning over a birthday cake, eyes half closed from laughter. These images held a quiet truth. They were not extraordinary people, but they loved in a way that made life feel steady. Friends remembered them as inseparable. He had a protective gentleness about him, the type of man who fixed neighbors' fences without being asked, who showed up with his truck whenever someone needed help moving. She had a softness that drew people in, warm eyes, a thoughtful voice, a way of listening that made others feel understood. Together they created an unspoken safety for everyone who knew them. There was nothing glamorous about their relationship, but it radiated a loyalty that made people believe in simple, honest love. Yet even in that warmth, there were small cracks that only became noticeable in hindsight, the kind of things that blend into everyday life. Quick glances exchanged in grocery store aisles, unfinished conversations that ended in faint smiles, long pauses before answering simple questions. At the time, these moments were invisible, swallowed by the comfort of routine. Later, they would take on a far heavier meaning. Their days followed an uncomplicated pattern that didn't seem capable of harboring the seeds of a mystery. He worked long hours, often returning home with the scent of engine oil lingering on his clothes. She volunteered at the local library, where she was known for gently recommending books that somehow always matched what people needed to hear. They attended small gatherings, Sunday potlucks, backyard barbecues, the kind of events that stitch a community together in quiet, durable ways. What stood out, even then, was the way they paid attention to one another. He noticed when she was tired and would prepare dinner without being asked. She noticed when his shoulders slumped after a difficult day and would sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder until the tension eased. These gestures painted a picture of two people deeply connected. But connection, as comforting as it is, does not always reveal what lies beneath. In the months before they vanished, a few friends sensed a subtle shift. Nothing dramatic, just a faint thinning of the bright ease that once surrounded them. She seemed distracted at times, drifting into her thoughts during conversations. He became more cautious with his words, choosing them slowly as if afraid of stepping onto fragile ground. Some chalked it up to financial stress, others to quiet marital pressures that all couples face. But no one imagined it could be the beginning of something larger. Their home life held small curiosities too easily dismissed. A late-night light left on in the living room when both claimed to be asleep. A drawer that was always kept closed, though no one thought to ask why. Receipts tucked into corners of the kitchen counter. A faint tension that flickered and then disappeared like static between radio stations. The signs were there, but they were soft, too gentle to spark suspicion, too scattered to form a story. And yet, the people closest to them would later admit that there were moments, brief but sharp, when something in the air felt off. A slight tightness in her voice. A strange quiet settling over him like dust. Tiny hesitations woven into everyday interactions. But love, even from the outside, often chooses to overlook the subtle signals it doesn't want to decipher. To their neighbors, the couple looked like the embodiment of small-town certainty, the kind of people others use as a reference point when everything else felt unstable. If they were steady, the world felt steady. If they were happy, the world felt a little kinder. Their reliability became a silent promise, a promise that would shatter the night they didn't come home. The beauty of their life was its simplicity. The tragedy was that simplicity can mask complexity so well that no one realizes something is wrong until it's too late. They moved through their days with a grace that made their story feel predictable, even safe. But beneath that familiarity lived a truth that no one had yet uncovered, a truth that waited quietly in the shadows of their routines. Years later, when the hidden drawer was found, people would recall these early memories and search them for meaning, for hints, for warnings. They would replay conversations, revisit gestures, reconsider the spaces between words. They would wonder how two people so deeply woven into the fabric of their community could disappear without tearing a single seam on the surface, at least not until the drawer revealed why. But in that moment, before the vanishing, before the panic, before the unraveling, the couple lived a life that seemed whole, a life framed by warm light through kitchen windows, shared glances, small dreams, and unspoken troubles that neither of them could name aloud. A life so delicately balanced that no one suspected how easily it could tip into darkness. The last day they were seen began with a kind of soft, unremarkable Kentucky morning that slips into memory without announcing itself. A pale sun rose slowly over the hills, casting a warm glow over the front porch, catching on the dew that clung to the railing. Nothing about that sunrise hinted that the day would become a fracture in time, a point everyone connected to them would return to again and again, searching for meaning between seconds. They woke early, according to what friends later pieced together. She stepped into the kitchen first, the faint scent of coffee drifting through the house. He joined her a few minutes later, his hair still damp from a quick shower, offering a small half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was the kind of morning routine that felt almost scripted by years of repetition. Two people moving around each other with quiet familiarity. But small deviations lingered if one looked closely enough. The coffee was a little stronger than usual. Their conversation, overheard by a neighbor through an open window, was softer, almost weightless, as if both were choosing their words with care. Later that morning, they drove to town together. Their car, a familiar, aging sedan, pulled into the same grocery store parking lot they visited every week. Surveillance footage captured them walking in side by side. She carried a small shopping list folded in her hand. He kept glancing at her, as though trying to read something in her expression. They bought simple things: bread, fresh fruit, a pack of light bulbs, a bottle of cleaner, items as ordinary as the day should have been. But the cashier remembered something that didn't make sense until months later. When the couple reached the register, they stood a little farther apart than usual. She tapped her fingers against the counter, a nervous habit she rarely displayed in public. He kept adjusting the sleeve of his jacket, even though it wasn't cold. Their smiles, kind but distant, felt like masks they'd chosen to wear for each other rather than for the world. After the grocery store, they made two more stops. First, the local gas station where he filled a tank. Witnesses said he seemed frustrated, though no one could agree on whether it was subtle annoyance or the deeper kind of irritation someone tries to hide. She stayed inside the car, staring out the window at a row of trees, swaying in the breeze. One person recalled seeing her lips moving, as if she were talking to herself, or rehearsing something. Their final stop was a roadside produce stand, where they bought a small carton of tomatoes. The vendor remembered her asking if the tomatoes were fresh, her voice polite but distracted. He remembered the husband standing a few feet behind her, his arms crossed, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't decide whether it was the right moment. It was a brief interaction, lost the flow of the day, but it would become one of the last times anyone spoke to them. Shortly afterward, they were seen getting into the car again, this time from a distance. A neighbor driving past noticed that she got into the passenger seat more slowly than usual, pausing with her hand on the doorframe. The driver, her husband, seemed to be talking to her through the open door, not loudly, not angrily, just earnestly, as though he was pleading for her to understand something, or perhaps to accept something. But the sound of the passing vehicle drowned out the moment, and whatever words were exchanged drifted away into the afternoon. That was the last widely confirmed sighting of the couple. But the day didn't end there. There were other accounts, varying, conflicting, each colored by memory, emotion, or the simple unreliability of human observation. Some people claimed to have seen their car heading out of town around dusk. Others insisted they spotted them walking near the creek, though no footprints ever confirmed that. A truck driver believed he saw their vehicle parked in an overlook just before sunset, but he couldn't say with certainty whether it was them or simply a similar car. Every potential sighting added more threads to the story, none of which could be woven into a definitive timeline. Their neighbors recalled that their porch light, which they usually turn on only at night, was still off when the sun began to set. This struck a few people as odd. The couple was attentive to small routines. The light being off suggested they hadn't returned home after their errands. But at that point, no one was alarmed. They were adults living a quiet life. It was easy to assume they'd stopped somewhere, visited someone, taken a scenic drive. Nothing about their absence seemed ominous yet. When darkness fell, the town settled into its usual calm. But for that couple, something had begun, a shift no one witnessed, a moment where ordinary time broke away from them. Somewhere along a road they'd traveled countless times, or somewhere deeper within a path they never spoke about. Something happened. Something quiet enough to leave no noise behind, but powerful enough to erase two people from the world, as if the day had swallowed them whole. By nightfall, their car was no longer seen by anyone. Their phones went unanswered. The house remained untouched, every object inside frozen in the position it had been that morning. A pot on the stove, a magazine open on the coffee table, a jacket hung neatly by the door. Life inside the home waited patiently for its owners, unaware that they would not return to disturb its stillness. Later investigations would try to recreate their last hours, dissecting every decision they made, every interaction they had, every place they visited. But no reconstruction could explain the lingering sense that something had been building long before that day. A pressure beneath the surface, a quiet unraveling disguised by routines and polite smiles. What made the last day so haunting was not what was seen, but what wasn't. No argument overheard, no sign of distress, no clear departure from their normal patterns. Just a series of ordinary tasks layered atop a tension too faint for anyone to name in the moment. And so the final hours of their known life became a puzzle with too few pieces. A day that began like any other, filled with the softness of routine, but ended by becoming the edge of a void that no one could comprehend. A day that would eventually tie itself to a secret hidden in a drawer, one that would explain some things, complicate others, and ultimately reveal that the truth had been sitting quietly in the spaces between their gestures all along. But in 2002, that truth remained locked away. All the town had was a fading memory of their last steps, stitched together from glances and guesses, overshadowed by a silence that deepened with each passing hour. The first 24 hours after they failed to return felt like nothing more than an inconvenience, a small disturbance in a life that usually ran smoothly. Friends assumed they were busy. Family figured they'd turned in early, both exhausted from a long day of errands. No one sensed danger yet. People don't disappear in quiet towns for no reason. Not good people, not familiar faces woven into the community like thread. But as the second day crept in, the tone began to shift. At first, it was just a handful of small, dissonant signs. She didn't show up at the library, though she had never missed a shift without warning. He didn't arrive at the shop where he worked, and his boss, initially irritated, found himself unsettled by the empty parking spot he'd come to rely on. Calls went to voicemail. Messages remained unread. A knock on their door echoed in a house that didn't answer back. What unnerved people most was how untouched everything inside the home felt, as though time had paused itself the moment they stepped out. Their bed was still neatly made. A mug she had used that morning sat rinsed beside the sink. The jacket he wore when the weather turned cool was still hanging by the door. These weren't the details of a couple who planned to be gone long. These were the remnants of an interrupted life. By then, an undercurrent of worry began to hum through those closest to them. It wasn't loud or panicked. It was quiet, tentative, something whispered rather than said aloud. Friends texted each other, comparing notes they weren't yet calling concerns. A neighbor left a voicemail on the couple's phone. try to keep the tone light, but unable to hide the unease shaping every word. As the hours continued to pass with no sign of them, worry thickened into something more tangible, the kind of weight that makes a person sit up straighter. Check their watch more often. Listen carefully for a car engine that never comes. People found themselves glancing toward the couple's house, as if expecting the driveway to magically fill with the familiar sedan. The porch remained empty. The yard stayed still. The wind moved, but nothing else did. On the evening of the second day, a close friend decided it was time to call police. Even then, she apologized during the call, as if afraid of overreacting. The officer on the other end asked all the routine questions. Had they talked about leaving town? Any recent arguments? Did they take overnight bags? The friend answered each question with the same heavy truth. No, no, and no. Nothing about this disappearance made sense. When officers arrived at the home, they found nothing out of place. No signs of struggle, no indication of a sudden departure. Just silence. A heavy, waiting kind of silence that seemed to settle into walls. The police left with more questions than answers, promising to look into it, promising to call back, promising that people don't just vanish. But even then, in their measured professionalism, there was a faint tension in their movements. Something about the untouched house unnerved them too. By the end of that night, the couple's absence had begun to ripple outward. The people who loved them started to retrace their final known steps, piecing together the mundane details of their last day. Grocery store, gas station, produce stand, a drive home that should have taken less than 20 minutes. It felt impossible that such ordinary choices could lead to such an extraordinary disappearance. The community responded in its own quiet way. A few neighbors gathered on front porches, exchanging murmurs that carried a soft ache. Others sat by their windows long after dark, unable to shake the feeling that something had shifted beneath the surface of their routine lives. Even people who didn't know the couple well felt the strain of the absence, as though a familiar melody had suddenly stopped, leaving a ringing silence in its place. There is a particular dread that forms when loved ones go missing, not because of what is known, but because of what isn't. Fear grows from the questions left unanswered, the spaces left empty. The couple's disappearance wasn't loud enough to alarm the whole town instantly. It didn't come with flashing lights or frantic screams. It seeped in slowly, like water soaking into wood, deepening with each hour that passed without a clue. By the time the sun rose on the third day, the absence had settled into everyone's bones. It wasn't just concern anymore. It was certainty, quiet, heavy, undeniable, that something had gone wrong. Something beyond an everyday mishap. Something that didn't fit the shape of normal life. The town didn't know it yet, but they were standing at the edge of a mystery that would stretch far beyond those first hours of unanswered calls and unanswered prayers. A mystery that would grow roots in the days to come, tightening its grip on every person who tried to make sense of the silence left behind. And deep within that silence, the truth waited patiently, still hidden, still sealed away, until the day a forgotten drawer would finally reveal it. The search for the couple began quietly, almost shyly, as though the town itself couldn't yet believe it was necessary. At first, a handful of friends and neighbors walked the familiar roads around the couple's home, calling their names into the warm Kentucky air. Their voices sounded hopeful in those early hours, soft but sure, like people expecting an answer just around the bend. But the farther they walked without finding anything, the more those voices shifted. First confusion, then to unease. By midday, the small search had grown into something larger. Word spread quickly in towns like theirs. Concern travels faster than gossip. People began arriving with water bottles, flashlights, old maps creased from years of use. Some brought their dogs, believing that familiar scents might lead them somewhere. Others came because staying at home felt unbearable, like sitting still would make the fear sink deeper into their chests. It wasn't long before the town's quiet roads filled with footsteps, with determined faces, with people who refused to accept the couple could simply disappear. Authorities joined the effort soon after. Police vehicles lined the roadside, their presence both reassuring and unnerving. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades slicing through the summer air. The sound echoed through the valleys, bouncing off hillsides like a mechanical heartbeat. It made the search feel suddenly larger, more urgent, and for the first time, people began to whisper about the possibility that something terrible had happened, something no one was brave enough to articulate yet. As the search widened, the emotional landscape of the town began to fracture. Friends who had once shared easy conversations now found themselves speaking in short, hurried sentences. Parents pressed their children closer. Neighbors walked down streets with eyes sharpened before, noticing details they had overlooked for years. An unfamiliar truck parked near the edge of a field, a broken fence post that hadn't been broken last week, a tire track that seemed out of place. Every ordinary thing became a potential clue. Every shadow became a question. On the third day of searching, volunteers combed through the woods surrounding the town. The forest floor was soft beneath their boots, muffling their steps and making the silence feel almost sacred. They moved in slow lines, careful not to disturb anything meaningful. The rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch, each sound carried weight. Hope flickered and faltered with every hour that passed. Some searched with fierce determination, others with trembling hands. But all of them carried the same heavy thought. If the couple were out here, they should have been found by now. As the hours turned into days, emotions deepened. The initial rush of community solidarity slowly transformed into exhaustion, frustration, and quiet grief. People who had never spoken more than a casual greeting found themselves sharing fears beneath the shade of maple trees. They confessed things to each other, memories, suspicions, regrets, confessions shaped by desperation and uncertainty. Some blamed themselves for not noticing signs earlier. Others blamed the vastness of the land, the lonely roads, the possibility that something or someone had intervened. Rumors began to bloom like wildflowers, spreading across town with alarming ease. Some whispered that the couple had left willingly, slipping away to escape something no one else knew about. Others believed they had fallen victim to someone passing through, someone who knew how to disappear. A few thought the land itself swallowed them, as though the hills had secrets older than any of them understood. Each rumor added fractures to the already fragile spirit of the community. Despite the emotional strain, the search did something else. It revealed how deeply the couple was woven into the town's heart. People who rarely volunteered for anything showed up with determination. Young adults, usually restless and indifferent, walked side by side with elders who moved slowly but refused to stay home. There was something sacred in the shared effort, something raw in the collective fear. The community was being pulled apart by uncertainty, but it was also being bound together by the need to find them. Yet with each passing day, the absence felt heavier. The search map spread across tables at the local community center became covered with lines and circles. Areas checked and double-checked, paths walked again and again. Every stretch of land marked off felt like another door closing, another possibility slipping away. Search leaders tried to stay composed, but even their voices had begun to carry the brittle edge of worry. Then came the first real moment of despair, a pause in the search, not because people wanted to rest, but because they were afraid of what they might find if they kept looking. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it lingered in the eyes of everyone who gathered near the edge of the woods that evening. They were terrified of discovering the worst, and equally terrified of discovering nothing at all. Night after night, the couple's family stood at the center of these efforts, their grief a silent force pulling everyone forward. The mother's eyes grew darker with each passing hour. The father's hands, usually strong, steady, began to shake when he folded maps or answered questions. Their pain became the heart of the search, an anchor that no one could ignore. By the end of the first week, something had changed in the atmosphere of the town. The search was no longer just a coordinated effort. It had become a collective haunting. People began to dream about the couple. Their names lingered in conversations long after midnight. The search area started to feel like chapters in a book with missing pages. Everyone sensed there was a story here, one buried beneath ordinary routines and quiet gestures, but no one could grasp its shape. What made the search so painful was not just the absence of answers, but the growing suspicion that the truth was hiding somewhere close, somewhere familiar, somewhere that made everyone shiver. The town didn't know it yet, but the secret tethering the couple's disappearance was lurking far away from the forests and fields they were scouring. It was waiting quietly in the house they had left behind, hidden within walls that had once held their laughter. A secret tucked in a drawer no one had reason to open, a drawer that would eventually rip the entire narrative apart. But during those first desperate days, the search consumed the people who loved them. It pulled them apart, stitched them back together, and left them raw. And as the sun set on yet another day without answers, the silence that stretched across the fields felt like a warning, one no one yet understood. Clues began appearing in ways that felt both promising and cruel, like the mystery was teasing the town, offering possibilities only to snatch them away again. The early leads were small, almost delicate, but they shimmered with enough hope that people clung to them. A car similar to the couple's was spotted near an abandoned barn. A hiker thought they heard voices near the riverbank. A delivery driver claimed he saw two figures walking down a dirt road at dusk. Each sighting, whether credible or flimsy, sent ripples through the town, stirring new theories and stirring old fears. The first major lead came 3 days into the search. A teenager riding his bike near the outskirts of town spotted something glinting in the grass, a piece of metal he thought might be from a car. The police rushed to the scene, volunteers holding their breath as the object was held up to the light. But it was nothing more than an old strip of chrome from a long-abandoned vehicle. It was a reminder of how cruelly similar the ordinary could look to the extraordinary when desperation sharpened the eyes. Still, false hope didn't stop the search. It only made people more determined. Every rumor, every whisper of clue, drew crowds toward new corners of the town. A woman living near the hills swore she saw headlights late at night in an area where cars rarely traveled. A fisherman reported hearing something like a shout echo across the water, though he admitted he could have mistaken for the cry of an animal. Each account was shaky, filled with uncertainty. But for a community clinging to the last threads of hope, even the vaguest possibility felt worth chasing. But with every new lead came a new sense of confusion. The sightings overlapped in ways that didn't make sense, places too far apart for the couple to realistically travel between the time they were supposedly seen. Some witnesses were certain they saw the couple walking separately. Others insisted they were together. A trucker claimed to have seen the husband alone at a gas station 2 counties away. But the security footage from that station showed someone else entirely, a man who only vaguely resembled him from a particular angle. The mystery began to stretch, pulling the town in too many directions. Each potential sighting created its own storyline, its own set of questions, its own emotional weight. People spent hours discussing whether the couple might have gotten lost, whether they'd been arguing, whether they were running from something or someone. Every theory built itself from shaky details, stitched together with guesses that grew more desperate by the day. One of the strangest leads came from a stretch of road just outside town. A state worker claimed he saw a sedan parked near the tree early one morning. He couldn't remember the exact color, only that it looked familiar in shape. The car was gone when officers arrived, but the grass beneath where he said it had been was flattened. A few feet away, a faint footprint suggested someone had stepped into the woods. But a passing rainstorm washed away any clear impressions, leaving behind only the suggestion of a trail that might never have existed. Another clue emerged near a creek. A volunteer found a discarded water bottle, the same brand the couple often bought. That discovery sent a surge of energy through the search party. But when investigators examined it, they found no fingerprints, no consistent timeline linking it to the missing pair. It could have belonged to anyone. Even so, some volunteers insisted the bottle meant something. It felt wrong to dismiss any detail, no matter how small. Frustration slowly began to settle into the hearts of those searching. The clues pointed in every direction and in no direction at all. The forest seemed to grow larger, the roads longer, the landscape wider with each passing day. It felt as though the couple had dissolved into the very air, becoming part of the hills and trees and riverbanks that refused to give anything back. The emotional toll weighed heavily. People found themselves questioning their memories. When they last saw the couple, what they noticed, what they didn't. Some neighbors admitted they had overlooked moments that now seemed significant. The couple leaving home earlier than usual, a light burning late at night, a strange truck parked near their driveway the week before. But memory is fickle, shaped more by fear than truth during times of crisis. Conflicting clues also created friction among those closest to the couple. The family wanted to believe every lead, desperate for even the faintest sign of life. Investigators remained cautious, unwilling to let hope blur their judgment. Volunteers grew divided. Some believed the couple had gone willingly, while others were convinced something sinister had happened. The search that once united the community began to expose its hidden fractures. Through it all, the land itself seemed almost complicit in the confusion. The Kentucky woods were dense, filled with paths that twisted unexpectedly. Ravines created sudden drops. Hidden clearings appeared like secrets tucked between trees. Even the river changed its course slightly after heavy rain, a shifting current that could easily erase a clue or carry away something meaningful. Every corner of the landscape felt like it was holding its breath, refusing to give up the truth. As the days dragged on, the clues became even more contradictory. A backpack was discovered near a hiking path, but it belonged to a group of campers. A pair of shoes were found tangled in brush by the river, but they didn't match the couple's sizes. A message scribbled on a picnic table at a rest stop raised suspicions, though it turned out to be months old. Each moment of hope was quickly swallowed by disappointment. The strangest part was how the mystery seemed to widen rather than narrow. Instead of converging into a single explanation, the clues branched out like veins, each leading to a different possibility. It became clear that something was missing, some piece of the puzzle so essential that without it, none of the clues could make sense. Without it, the story could never be complete. That crucial piece, the one everyone desperately searched for in the fields, the woods, the rivers, the roads, wasn't out there at all. It was sitting quietly, hidden in their home, sealed inside a drawer no one had ever thought to question. But nobody knew that yet. All they knew was a relentless blur of possibilities that led everywhere and nowhere, winding the town into knots of hope and dread. And with each passing day, the truth seemed to slip a little further out of reach, retreating into the shadows where it waited, patient and silent, for the moment it would finally be found. In the weeks that followed, the search expanded outward, but the investigation began folding inward, toward the couple themselves, toward the private corners of their lives that no one had ever examined closely. People had always believed the couple lived simply and openly, but simplicity can be deceptive, and openness can hide entire worlds beneath its surface. As investigators dug deeper, a portrait began to form, not of malice or betrayal, but of two people quietly carrying burdens they had never learned to name out loud. The first hints of secrecy appeared in subtle details tucked inside their home. A stack of unopened letters on the kitchen counter, each from the same financial institution, each marked urgent. They weren't dramatic, just warnings of overdue payments, but they whispered a pressure the couple had never mentioned. Friends later admitted they'd occasionally sensed stress, in the way she paused before answering questions about money, or the way he rubbed the back of his neck when bill paying was mentioned. At the time, no one thought much of it. But now those moments seemed like small fractures spreading through an otherwise stable life. Investigators also found traces of disagreements, nothing explosive, nothing violent, but disagreements that hinted at deeper concerns. A neighbor remembered hearing muffled voices one night, not yelling but tense, stretched in like a thread pulled too tightly. It had lasted only a minute before fading into silence. Another friend recalled her mentioning in passing that she had been tired lately, though she brushed away with a smile that didn't match her eyes. These scattered memories, once insignificant, now seemed like the faint outlines of something more complicated. Financial stress alone didn't explain the disappearance, but it painted a different backdrop to the couple's last months, a quiet weight they carried together, perhaps not always gracefully. Their bank records revealed cash withdrawals they couldn't fully account for, small amount at first, then larger ones. Some were made at odd hours. Others were made in different parts of the county. Investigators tried to trace the destination of the money, but the trail grew as confusing as the physical search. Then there was the matter of the purchases. Receipts found in the house showed items they rarely bought. Tools they didn't seem to need, travel-sized items though they hadn't taken a trip in years, and a set of maps that appeared worn even though no one remembered the couple traveling recently. These details didn't scream danger or deception, but they created a subtle unease, a sense that something was happening beneath the surface of their ordinary routines. Her habits had changed, too. At the library, Colleagues remembered she had become quieter in the weeks before she vanished. She lingered near the windows more often, staring out as though searching for something beyond the parking lot. She returned books to the wrong shelves more than once, something she almost never did. When asked if everything was all right, she responded with a soft, "Just tired," a phrase that now felt weighted with 1,000 unspoken meanings. His behavior showed its own shifts. He stayed late at work more frequently, though his co-workers said he didn't seem focused on any particular task. Sometimes he sat in his truck for long minutes before driving away, staring straight ahead as if unwilling to go home or unsure of what waited for him there. Friends who saw him during those weeks described him as distant, his usual warmth muted by something he couldn't articulate. The couple's shared routines showed cracks as well. They were known for going on evening walks together, a small ritual they rarely skipped. But neighbors noted that in the month before the disappearance, the walks became infrequent. When they did happen, the two walked with noticeable distance between them, the easy rhythm they once shared replaced by something more tentative. They still spoke, but their gestures had changed. Less touching, fewer shared glances, more silence. Yet even with these subtle fractures, there was no clear sign of danger. Their secrets were soft, not sharp. Human, not sinister. The kind of secrets people carry because they don't know how to ask for help, not because they are trying to hide from the world. Investigators uncovered more threads, a private journal she kept tucked away, containing notes about feeling overwhelmed, about longing for quiet, though it was unclear what she meant by that. A notebook he kept in the garage with sketches of routes, plans for repairs, calculations no one could decipher. Their lives, once thought simple, revealed layers of worry and complexity, interlocking like puzzle pieces that didn't fit neatly together. And then there were the stories whispered by acquaintances, glimpses of moments that felt strangely symbolic. She had been seen sitting alone in her car outside a cafe one morning, staring at her hands as though trying to steady herself. He had been spotted at a hardware store buying a lock he never installed. Little things, insignificant alone, but unsettling together. But the most haunting revelation came from the couple's closest friend, who hesitated for days before admitting something she'd noticed. A week before they vanished, she had visited their home. She remembered feeling a strange tension in the air, a heaviness she couldn't explain. The couple had offered smiles, but their eyes seemed distracted, each glance between them loaded with something unspoken. When the friend left that evening, she felt a tightness in her chest, a vague intuition that something was wrong, but she couldn't name what or why. She pushed the feeling aside, convincing herself she was overthinking. Now, she wished she had listened to that instinct. All these small revelations did something devastating. They reshaped the couple in the minds of the people who loved them. They were no longer just a gentle, steady pair who sat together on their porch. They became two people quietly battling pressures they hadn't shared with anyone. Two people carrying secrets not out of deceit, but out of fear or uncertainty or love twisted into silence. And yet, every piece of this new insight raised more questions than answers. These secrets spoke of stress, emotional distance, quiet worry, but none of them explained disappearance. None of them justified a vanishing, so total it felt like the earth swallowed them. Their hidden struggles painted a picture of emotional complexity, not danger. The truth, still sealed away in that unseen drawer, remained untouched, waiting for the moment when all these fragments would finally find their place. But for now, the town was left with shadows, soft, human shadows that hinted at inner storms, but not the storm that had carried the couple away. The breakthrough arrived with the kind of force that electrifies an exhausted community, sudden, sharp, and full of possibility. It didn't come from a planned search area or a new witness statement. It came from chance, the kind of coincidence that towns latch onto when hope has been stretched thin. For the first time in weeks, there was something that felt real, tangible, something that might finally answer the questions hanging heavy in every heart. It began with a farmer who lived on the far side of the county, a quiet man who rarely involved himself in local matters. He woke one morning to find deep tire tracks cutting across the edge of his land near the tree line. The tracks didn't match his tractor or his truck, and he couldn't recall anyone visiting him. More unsettling was what he found a few feet beyond. A torn scrap of fabric snagged on a branch, pale in color, almost like one of the shirts she used to wear. He hesitated before calling the sheriff's office. People had been on edge for weeks, and he didn't want to stir panic over something as small as a tire mark. But something about the tracks bothered him. The angle, the depth, the way they curved sharply toward the woods as though the driver had been in a hurry. So he dialed the number, voice low and uncertain, explaining what he'd found. Within an hour, investigators arrived. At first glance, the scene held promise. The tire impressions were fresh, only a few days old, not weathered by rain or wind. The cloth scraps seemed recently torn, threads clean and bright in the morning sun. For the first time in weeks, the air felt charged, alive with the possibility that the search had finally brushed against the missing pair's path. Word spread quickly. People who had been worn down by endless searching felt something stir inside them, hope rising again, steadying legs that had nearly given out. Volunteers gathered, whispering with a mixture of fear and excitement. Some cried quietly, unwilling to let themselves believe this was a moment they'd been waiting for, but unable to stop the hope blooming in their chests. The farmer stood off to the side, wrestling with guilt for not noticing sooner. The area was sealed off. Investigators combed the woods with renewed intensity, marking off grid patterns, calling for silence as they searched for footprints or items partially buried under leaves. Dogs were brought in, their handlers tense as they guided them through the underbrush. The dogs sniffed, circled, paused, but their signals were confusing, inconsistent, and difficult to interpret. Still, there were signs that pulled everyone deeper into belief. A faint indentation in the ground that could have been a shoe print, an old fire ring with ashes that looked fresher than the rest, a discarded plastic wrapper matching a brand the couple often purchased. Each detail, small and ambiguous, took on a new kind of weight amid the collective desperation. For a brief, fragile moment, it looked like the mystery was cracking open, but then the unraveling began. The first fissure came when investigators examined the tire tracks more closely. They discovered that the tread pattern was consistent with a model of truck widely used in the area. In fact, one of the officers realized it matched a vehicle that had visited the neighboring property a few days earlier, someone helping repair a fence line. The farmer had simply not been home to see it. The scrap of fabric followed the same disappointing path. It wasn't a shirt fragment at all. It was a corner of an old rag used to tie fence wire. The color, faded by sun and rain, only looked similar to something she might have owned. Under closer inspection, the fibers were weathered, not freshly torn. It had likely been there for weeks, clinging to the branch unnoticed. The supposed shoe print was next to be disproven. A volunteer accidentally stepped on it while walking the perimeter, revealing it was nothing more than an irregular patch of softened earth. The fire ring, too, turned out to be old, an abandoned spot used by campers earlier in the season. The plastic wrapper traced back to a group of hikers who had passed through the area shortly after the disappearance. Piece by piece, the promising lead disintegrated. What had briefly looked like a trail straight into the couple's final moments collapsed into coincidence and misinterpretation. The hope that had surged through the community drained away as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a sharp ache more painful than before. The emotional fallout was immediate. Volunteers, who had poured their remaining strength into this new lead, felt crushed beneath the weight of disappointment. Some sat on the ground, heads in their hands, unable to speak. Others walked away silently, shoulders slumped under the invisible burden of yet another dead end. A few lashed out, not in anger at any one person, but at the situation itself, at the unfairness of being guided so close to answers only to be thrust back into uncertainty. Family members were devastated. The couple's mother had arrived at the scene earlier that day, clutching a hope so fierce it looked almost like determination. When the truth came out, when the sheriff quietly explained that none of the evidence pointed to the couple, she looked as though the ground had fallen away from beneath her feet. Her grief didn't come in sobs. It came in silence, a silence deeper and more painful than any words could reflect. Investigators felt the blow too. Though trained to maintain composure, they weren't immune to the emotional tug of the case. The lead had appeared solid, the first real thread in the knot of confusion. Losing it made the mystery feel even more impossible, as if the truth were slipping out of reach each time they got close enough to touch it. The town reacted in waves. Some grew angry, insisting the authorities had mishandled the clues. Others blamed themselves for believing too quickly. Many simply felt hollow, as if the sudden rush of hope had carved out a space inside them that now sat empty and echoing. Conversations around dinner tables grew sharper. Nights fell heavier. People went to bed feeling more lost than they had at the beginning of the search. What made this fall's breakthrough particularly cruel was how complete it had felt. Unlike the fleeting rumors or distant sightings, this lead had roots in physical space, in dirt and cloth, in tire tracks. It gave the illusion of progress, the illusion that the couple was finally within reach. But illusions are the most painful kind of deception. By the time investigators cleared the area and announced the lead was no longer considered viable, something fundamental in the community had shifted. The collective hope that had once held them together now felt fragile, too easily broken. People spoke less of possibilities and more of impossibilities. The world felt wider, more uncertain, as though the land itself had turned into a maze that refused to reveal its exit. But beneath the disappointment, something else stirred, quiet, subtle, but powerful. A sense of restraint, a recognition that the truth wouldn't arrive in grand discoveries or sudden revelations. It would come from the details no one had noticed yet, the places no one had thought to look, and the most important place of all, the couple's home, remained largely unexplored. Because no one imagined the key to everything was tucked away behind a panel, in a drawer hidden so perfectly that even those who loved them had never known it existed. That truth still waited in silence. This breakthrough had failed. But soon, one that no one expected would change the entire narrative. Years passed before the discovery of the hidden drawer, years in which the couple's home stood like a half-frozen memory, preserved by time and grief. After the search dwindled and the leads dissolved, the house remained mostly untouched. Family members couldn't bring themselves to clear it out. Friends avoided stepping inside, afraid the stillness might swallow them whole. Instead, the home became a quiet monument to the unanswered question no one could escape. What really happened to them? It wasn't until the property was finally prepared for resale, long after hope had thinned into a quiet ache, that the drawer revealed itself. The day it was found began unremarkably. A family friend, one of the few people who still visited the house regularly, volunteered to help pack away the remaining belongings. She moved slowly through the rooms, each object holding a different kind of memory. A faded curtain they had chosen together. A corner of the living room where they used to sit with warm drinks on winter nights. A small dent on the wall from a picture frame that had once fallen. She touched each surface as if afraid to disturb the past too loudly. The air in the house felt thick, almost stale from years of stillness. Dust floated through streaks of sunlight, moving like soft ghosts. The friend wandered into the study, a space the couple used sparingly. Bookshelves lined the walls, holding paperbacks, weathered journals, and old maps folded with care. She began pulling down books to pack them into boxes, wanting to finish before dusk. Then something strange happened. When she slid one of the upper shelves forward to lift the books from behind it, she felt the shelf move slightly more than expected. It wobbled, not loosely, but as though something behind it resisted. She paused, pressing her fingertips to the wood. There was a faint space, almost imperceptible, between the shelf and the wall, enough to suggest that the shelf wasn't fixed into place the way the others were. Her heartbeat quickened. She pushed again, more firmly this time. The shelf shifted, just a fraction of an inch, but enough to confirm it was designed to move. A hidden space. She froze, breath tightening in her chest. She had known the couple for years. She had shared meals with them, laughed with them, confided in them. The idea that they had a secret compartment, something deliberately concealed, felt like a betrayal of everything she thought she understood about them. With trembling hands, she slid the shelf aside. It resisted at first, as if reluctant to reveal what it had kept hidden. But then, with a soft scrape, it gave way, sliding horizontally and exposing a narrow vertical panel behind it. The panel itself was unassuming, thin wood, slightly darker than the surrounding wall. But at its base, just barely visible beneath a ridge of dust, sat a small notch, a handle. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She hesitated, torn between fear and the desperate need for answers that had haunted her since the day the couple disappeared. Then she crouched, slipped her fingers into the notch, and pulled. The panel lifted with a low groan, almost like the house exhaling. Behind it, tucked into darkness, was a drawer. Not a normal drawer. Not something built into the structure when the house was constructed. Something added later. Something intentional. The friend stared at it, her mouth dry, her thoughts swirling. She took a breath, reached forward, and slid the drawer open. Inside the hidden compartment were several objects arranged with unsettling precision. The first thing she saw was a stack of folded papers held together with a fragile rubber band. Beneath them lay a small, battered camera, the kind people used in the late 90s and early 2000s. Its strap tangled like it had been shoved inside in a moment of urgency. Beside it rested a handful of receipts, the ink faded but still readable, and an envelope sealed with tape that had yellowed over time. But one object caught her attention immediately, a small metal pendant belonging to the wife. A pendant she had worn almost daily. A pendant she was not wearing the day she disappeared. The friend felt the room tilt, her knees weaken. Why had this been hidden? Why would the couple hide these items? And why hadn't anyone found this drawer earlier, despite the countless searches through the house? She pulled out the stack of papers first, hands shaking. The top sheet was a handwritten letter, but not addressed to anyone. It read more like a journal entry, the handwriting rushed and uneven. The date in the corner was 10 days before the couple vanished. A chill ran through her. She placed the papers aside and lifted the camera next. When she pressed the power button, nothing happened. The batteries were long dead. But the camera felt heavy with promise, as though its memory card held pieces of their private world frozen in time. The receipts were next. Gas purchases from areas far beyond the town. Motel bookings under initials rather than full names. Purchases at a hardware store for items that didn't match anything in the couple's home. Details that began knotting together into a story she didn't yet understand. And then the envelope. Her fingers hovered over it. The air around her felt charged, thick with the weight of the unknown. She peeled back the tape slowly, almost reverently. Inside were photographs, 4 of them. Each captured a different corner of a cabin she didn't recognize. A cabin with peeling paint, drawn curtains, and a table holding an object she couldn't fully make out. It looked like a map, marked with coordinates. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't just a forgotten drawer. This wasn't memorabilia or old clutter. This was deliberate. This was hidden for a reason. This was a truth buried inside their home, concealed behind shelves and panels, waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to find it. She sat back on the floor, surrounded by the contents of the drawer, feeling the overwhelming sense that she had stumbled into the couple's shadowed inner life, a life they had kept hidden from everyone, even the people who loved them most. For years, the town had searched the forests, the fields, the rivers. They had scanned landscapes, interviewed strangers, and dug through the couple's schedules. But the real answer, the real beginning of the truth, had been sitting quietly in this house, sealed in a drawer no one knew existed. The room felt different now, heavier with revelation. The friend realized she was looking at the first tangible pieces of the couple's final days, a mosaic of secrets that no one had imagined. Everything investigators believed was about to change. The narrative, long stuck in uncertainty, was about to be rewritten, because the hidden drawer didn't just hold objects. It held a story, one the couple had never meant for the world to find. The items from the hidden drawer were carried to a table in the center of the couple's former study, each object placed gently on the surface as though it might shatter with the slightest pressure. The friend who discovered them felt a tremor run through her hands as she laid everything out. She knew she should call the authorities immediately, but she couldn't bring herself to step away. Not yet. The drawer had been silent for so many years, waiting, and now that it had finally spoken, she felt compelled to listen before anyone else touched the truth. The room filled with a strange tension, a hum of emotion that settled like dust in the air. Every object felt charged, weighted with meaning, with memory, with fragments of story long buried. Each piece was small enough to fit into one's palm, yet powerful enough to shift the ground beneath the entire investigation. She began with the stack of papers. The handwriting was unmistakably the wife's, looped, slightly leaning to the right, usually neat but now hurried, the ink darker in places where her hand must have trembled. The first page wasn't a letter, not exactly. It read like an outpouring, a confession written in private, her thoughts raw on the page. She wrote about exhaustion, not the physical kind, but a deep emotional heaviness that clung to her even on good days. Words like pressure, fear, and unspoken things repeated throughout. She wrote about feeling like she was standing on a line between leaving everything and losing everything, though she never clarified what that line represented. The next page was dated 5 days later. In it, her tone shifted, still anxious, but steadier, as though she made a decision she wasn't ready to share. She mentioned a place away from all this, a place she described with both dread and hope. It wasn't clear whether she was referring to a physical location or a state of mind. And at the bottom of the page, circled and underlined twice, was a single phrase, hidden because it has to be. The friend's breath tightened. She didn't know what the wife had meant, but she felt the heaviness of those words settle into the room. The next piece of the mystery was the husband's notebook, found tucked beneath the camera in the drawer. His handwriting was starkly different, blocky letters, measured strokes. The pages were filled with numbers, calculations, and sketch-like drawings that resembled rough maps. Roads, intersecting lines, distances marked with arrows. Some pages contained scribbled notes like "back way is safer" or "check for signs first." Other pages simply held dates with no context, dates that, when cross-referenced to the wife's letters, showed a chilling overlap. They had been planning something. Not together necessarily, not apart either. Something in between, a crossing of fear and intention. The friend moved on to the receipts. The ink had faded, but most of them were still readable. Some were from gas stations along routes the couple rarely traveled. One receipt was from a motel in a neighboring county, purchased under the initials AH, the husband's initials. But the date was strange. It was from a night when he'd been at home with her, according to every friend and neighbor. Why rent the room? Why hide the receipt? 2 other receipts were from hardware stores. Both listed items that seemed mundane: rope, tape, a small lock, batteries, gloves. But taken together, the purchases felt unsettlingly purposeful. Not sinister, necessarily, but part of something carefully planned, something meant to remain unseen. Next came the camera. It was old, its plastic casing scratched from years of use. The friend pressed the power button again, even though she knew the batteries were dead. She imagined what might be stored inside. Pictures of places they never spoke about, captures of moments no one else witnessed. She placed the camera gently on the table, knowing investigators would access the memory card later. But the weight of it, the implication of whatever it held, pushed the room into deeper silence. Then she returned to the envelope of photographs. She spread them across the table like fragile cards, each one offering a different angle of the same location. A cabin, not abandoned but secluded. Its paint was peeling, its windows covered with curtains that blocked out all light. A narrow porch sagged, slightly under its own age. The interior shots were even more haunting: an unmade bed, a wooden table holding a map, a pair of boots positioned neatly near the door. In one photo, the wife's pendant, the same one found in the drawer, lay on the table beside the map. This detail hit the friend with staggering force. If the pendant had been with the wife at this cabin, how had it ended up hidden in this drawer? The possibilities tangled inside her mind, none of them comforting. The map in the photographs was marked with several small circles, one of them heavily outlined. Coordinates had been written in the corner, numbers that appeared again in the husband's notebook. It was clear the cabin wasn't random. It was central, significant, a place the couple knew, and possibly a place they had gone in the days before they vanished. But the darkest discovery was a folded sheet of paper tucked behind the photographs. It contained a series of sentences written in the husband's hand. Simple, direct, but carrying an undercurrent of desperation. If this works, we'll finally be free. If it doesn't, no one can know until it's over. It has to look real. The friend stared at the words, her heart beating so loudly she could feel it in her teeth. The sentences didn't explain anything clearly. They didn't give a blueprint or a confession. Instead, they hinted at something massively complicated, something between a plan and a plea, freedom from what, and what needed to look real. Rereading the wife's notes made the meaning even murkier. Her exhaustion, his urgency, her fear of losing everything, his insistence on secrecy, their maps, their hiding spot, the cabin. It became impossible to decipher whether the couple had been working together or drifting in opposite directions while attempting to solve the same problem. The drawer suggested alignment and conflict all at once, a paradox of intention. The friend sat back, overwhelmed. The air in the room pressed against her like a weight. These weren't clues left behind accidentally. They were fragments of a story the couple had never intended anyone to see. A truth too fragile or too dangerous to speak aloud. When investigators finally arrived and examined the drawer's contents, the atmosphere in the house shifted again. Officers moved with careful purpose, their faces tightening with each object they picked up. The truth hadn't fully revealed itself, but its shape had begun to take form. A story that was neither simple nor senseless. A story built from fear, secrecy, and love twisted by something unspoken. The contents of the drawer didn't provide closure. They opened a door into the couple's last days, a door everyone had been searching for, but no one had expected to find here. Tucked behind a bookshelf, the pages, the receipts, the maps, the camera. Each piece was a fragment of a truth too complicated to explain with a single theory. And for the first time since their disappearance, it felt as though the couple hadn't simply vanished. They had chosen a path, one no one yet understood, one that blurred the line between escape and entanglement. The truth was coming into focus, but it would not be gentle. It would not be easy, and it would not be what anyone expected. The items from a hidden drawer slowly guided investigators toward a theory that felt more human than any they had considered before. It wasn't one single clue that changed everything, but the way each fragment, receipts, notes, photographs, maps, seemed to whisper toward the same quiet truth. The couple had not been running from someone. They had been running towards something they desperately needed: space, silence, and a chance to breathe. The cabin became the center of the theory. The coordinates in the husband's notebook matched the location in the photographs. The wife's pen appeared on the cabin's table, proving she had been there. Their handwriting, hers emotional and uncertain, his methodical and cautious, suggested a joint but delicate plan. Their notes didn't hint at deception or danger. They hinted at exhaustion, tenderness, and a shared attempt to repair what had frayed between them. Investigators believe the couple intended only a temporary retreat, a few days alone to untangle the emotional knots they couldn't speak about openly. The receipts showed careful preparation, not panic. The photos on the camera confirmed they arrived safely, settling into the dim wooden space with serious but hopeful expressions. Then came the final photo, blurry, tilted, taken in haste. The wife's hand gripping the table, the husband's shadow turning sharply toward the door. Something unexpected had happened, something that interrupted their plan in a single, irreversible moment. The theory concluded not with drama, but with quiet tragedy. The couple had tried to heal away from the world, and whatever happened in the woods afterward had taken their lives before they could return. It wasn't the sinister story the town imagined. It was a fragile one. Two people searching for peace and losing themselves in the attempt. The truth did not arrive with drama or shock. It settled slowly, like a soft dusk over the town. When investigators shared their final theory, it wasn't presented as certainty, just the closest anyone had ever come to understanding the couple's final days. For years, the community had lived with the ache of not knowing, and this new theory didn't erase the grief, but it finally gave it a shape. People reacted in different ways. Some accepted the explanation quietly, grateful for something that resembled clarity. Others pushed back, clinging to darker possibilities, simply because they felt easier to hold than the idea of a gentle tragedy. But beneath the disagreement, one truth settled deeply. The couple hadn't run from danger. They had been trying to find peace. Together, the hidden drawer, the notes, the maps, the photographs, they all pointed toward a plan meant not for escape, but for healing. A temporary retreat to a secluded cabin, an attempt to mend emotional wounds too tender to expose to anyone else. The story that emerged was not about crime. It was about two people trying to protect each other. What happened afterward remained blurred. No remains are found, no final sign of their last steps. But investigators believe something unexpected, an accident, an injury, a sudden shift in safety, interrupted their attempt to return home. The mystery didn't conclude with sharp edges, only with the soft ache of understanding. The friend who found the drawer carried the truth with her long after the case quieted. She kept one photograph in the cabin as a reminder, not of their disappearance, but of their hope. The house eventually sold, life moved forward, and the town learned to live with an ending that would never be fully complete. Not closure, but peace, quiet, fragile, and finally within reach.